If my voice has found you, let it find you again. Subscribe. It matters more than it sounds. I first noticed it on a Tuesday. A sound that wasn't a knock, wasn't a step, but something softer. A pause that lived on the other side of my door. The kind you feel before you hear it. The city that night felt too quiet, like it had swallowed its own voice. From my window, I usually heard distant engines or the laughter of someone coming home too late. But that evening, the streets below my apartment might as well have been painted still. The only noise in my flat was the clock in the kitchen, ticking too loudly, reminding me of every second that crawled past. I sat curled on the sofa with a book in my lap, but I hadn't turned the page in half an hour. My eyes kept drifting to the front door. It wasn't logic. It was a sensation, that kind of pull your body obeys before your mind can explain it. The air felt heavier near the threshold, charged in a way I couldn't define. When I finally stood and crossed the living room, I went barefoot, careful not to make the floor creak. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I leaned forward and pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. Just the corridor, lit by a single weak bulb that flickered in its lazy dying rhythm. Beige wallpaper peeling at the edges, the familiar shadow of my neighbor's doormat 3 doors down. Still, I opened the door. That's when I saw it. A coin. Not lying off to the side, not dropped by accident, but placed exactly in the center of my doormat. Small, worn silver, scratched across the middle. I bent to pick it up, the cold metal pressed into my palm with the weight of a memory. My father once carried a coin just like this in his pocket. He'd show it to me when I was little, flipping it through his fingers like a magic trick. I'd lost his coin years ago, during one of those moves where too many boxes disappeared, and with them pieces of my life I didn't have the strength to hold on to. Yet, here it was. I closed the door, bolted it, and carried the coin into the apartment. Placing it on my coffee table, I stood staring at it as though it might shift on its own. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor's child, maybe some meaningless coincidence. But the way it had been placed so neatly, perfectly centered, as if waiting for me, that wasn't chance. The book in my lap stayed shut. I sat in the half-light until midnight, every tick of the clock pulling me closer to the door again. At some point, I even laughed at myself. "You're being ridiculous, Selene." But my laugh sounded brittle, like glass about to break. By morning, I'd convinced myself to forget it. Just a coin, nothing more. But when I opened the door to leave for work, something else waited for me. A folded slip of paper, blank on the outside. I picked it up, heart already racing, and opened it. Inside, in neat, deliberate handwriting, there was a single word. Remember. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. I could hear a TV murmuring from somewhere down the hall, a door slamming 2 floors above. But right there, in front of my apartment, it was just me and that word. Remember. Remember what? I slipped the note into my bag, locked the door, and walked to my car as though nothing had happened, though my pulse was sprinting. The city seemed too bright, too loud after that still hallway. Even traffic lights blinking red looked like warnings meant just for me. And all the way to work, one thought clung to me. Whoever left that coin, whoever left that word, wasn't finished. The day passed in fragments. I sat in the office, pretending to follow numbers and sketches on my screen, nodding through meetings where voices blurred into meaningless sounds. But my mind wasn't there. Every time I blinked, I saw that coin, that folded note with its single word, standing out as if written in fire. Remember. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, some ridiculous joke. People did strange things in this city. Maybe it was a neighbor with an odd sense of humor. But deep inside, I knew better. Whoever had left those objects had known exactly what they meant to me. The coin wasn't random. Neither was the note. By evening, the thought of returning home made my stomach tighten. I drove slower than usual, circling the block twice before finally pulling into my space. My building stood there, silent, the kind of silence that makes you feel watched even before you step inside. I paused at the front entrance, fumbling for my keys, as if the extra seconds could change what might be waiting upstairs. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp concrete and old paint. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I climbed. When I reached my door, I froze. There was something leaning against it. A book. Not just any book. A worn paperback with creases across the cover. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same edition of the same novel I had once carried everywhere when I was 17. A summer when I escaped into its pages night after night because the world outside had felt unbearable. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The spine cracked the same way mine once had. Inside, I flipped to the first page and felt my chest tighten. Scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize were 3 words. You forgot me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I glanced up and down the hallway, empty. The light buzzed overhead, flickering once, then steady again. No footsteps, no doors closing, just me and a book I hadn't seen in over a decade. I rushed inside and bolted the door. My apartment greeted me with its familiar silence, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The coin still lay on the coffee table. Now beside it, I placed the book and the note. 3 items. 3 messages. I paced the living room, trying to make sense of it. Who would know about these things? Who could possibly connect them all? My father's coin, my teenage book, my private memories scattered through time, now appearing one by one at my door. The possibilities swirled in my head, none of them comforting. An old friend? Someone from school? A stranger with access to parts of my past I never thought anyone remembered? And beneath it all, one darker thought pulsed like a heartbeat. Maybe it wasn't about who they were. Maybe it was about what they wanted me to face. I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked pale, eyes too wide, like someone I barely recognized. I whispered to the glass, "Why now?" But no answer came. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, every muscle tensed, listening to the faintest creaks of the building. At some point, I thought I heard it again, that soft shift outside my door. I sat upright, heart pounding, holding my breath. No knock, never a knock. Just the weight of presence pressing against the silence, then retreating, leaving behind the kind of emptiness that feels like a message. I didn't dare open the door again until morning, and when I did, the 4th object was waiting. A photograph, torn, faded at the edges, but unmistakably of me. The photograph lay on my doormat like it had been waiting all night for me to find it. Torn, faded at the edges, the paper curled slightly from age. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be one of those promotional postcards the building staff sometimes left behind. But when I bent down and picked it up, the breath caught in my throat. It was me. Not the me of now, Not the woman who knew how to lock her door twice and double-check the peephole. This was me as a child, sitting cross-legged on a front porch I hadn't seen in years. The summer light washed everything in gold, the sky bright, my hair shorter, tangled, and there, in the background, was a figure, blurred just enough to hide their face. I closed the door quickly, clutching the photograph against my chest, heart pounding so loud I thought the neighbors must hear it. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, its walls too close, its corners too dark. I dropped my keys on the counter, hands trembling, and slid the photo onto the coffee table, beside the coin, the note, the book. 4 objects now, each sharper than the last. My pulse refused to settle. How could anyone have this picture? I hadn't seen it in decades. That porch was my grandparents' house, torn down when I was 12. Only a handful of family albums ever held those summers. I never thought any copy of this photograph survived. Yet, someone had it. Someone had left it at my door. I stared at the blurred figure in the background. It could have been anyone, a relative, a neighbor, or someone else entirely. The more I stared, the more I imagined the shape leaning toward me, as if whispering something only I could hear. My thoughts tangled with memories I'd avoided for years. Hot afternoons chasing fireflies, my grandfather flipping that same silver coin across his knuckles, the sound of screen doors slamming in the heat. And the darker things too, the arguments behind closed doors, the silences at the dinner table that felt heavier than shouting. A shiver crawled up my spine. Was that what this was about? Forcing me to remember not just the sweet things, but the cracks beneath them? I sat down, pressing the photograph flat with my palm. The edges crumbled slightly under my touch, as fragile as the moment it captured. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. On the back, faint, in pencil, words. Smudged, but readable. Not gone. My mouth went dry. Not gone. I whispered it aloud, as though testing if the walls would answer back, but only the silence answered, thick and patient. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but what could I say? Hi, I think someone is leaving pieces of my past outside my door? They'd laugh, or worse, they'd look at me the way people look when they stop believing you. No, this was mine to face. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building sent me upright in bed, listening. Once I thought I heard the soft weight of someone outside again. Never knocking, never leaving a sound I could prove, just the pulse of presence pressing against my door. I stayed frozen until dawn. And when I finally dared to open the door the next morning, there was a 5th object waiting. A key. Old, heavy, its teeth jagged with rust, and tied to it with twine, a tag. On it, in the same careful hand, was written my name. The key was cold in my hand, heavier than I expected. Its teeth were uneven, rust biting into the ridges, the kind of key that belonged to doors long forgotten. But the tag, that fragile piece of card tied with twine, bore my name in clear, deliberate ink. Not apartment 3, not an address, just Selene. I turned it over and over, hoping for a clue. It smelled faintly metallic, with a trace of oil, as though someone had polished it recently despite its age. That detail unsettled me most, the care it had been given, as though it had a purpose still waiting. I laid it on the table beside the others, the coin, the note, the book, the photograph, now the key. 5 pieces of a puzzle I hadn't asked to solve. The collection stared back at me like a shrine I didn't mean to build. Why me? I whispered into the room, though of course I knew the answer. Because each object tied itself to me, threaded into places I had once lived, once felt, once lost. Whoever was leaving them understood me better than I understood myself. That evening, I carried the key into every room of my apartment, testing it against every lock I owned. It fit none of them. Not the front door, not the old chest in the corner, not even the storage room downstairs. It belonged elsewhere. Somewhere I hadn't been in years, or perhaps somewhere I had deliberately forgotten. I set it down again, but my eyes kept returning to it, as though its edges whispered. That night I dreamed of doors, endless doors stretching down a hallway without end, each painted a different shade of gray, each humming with something behind it. I moved from one to the next, key in hand, but none would open. I woke with the impression that I had missed something obvious, a door I should have recognized. The following morning, when I stepped out into the hall, I half expected another object waiting, but the doormat was bare, as if whoever had been leaving me these pieces had decided to pause. That absence felt heavier than their presence ever did. The silence clung to me all day. In the office, my colleagues' voices seemed muffled, as though they were speaking through water. I could see lips moving, hands gesturing, pens tapping, but my mind drifted elsewhere, to the key. I couldn't shake the thought that it had a home, a lock it yearned to turn. That evening, I walked through the neighborhood, key in my pocket, letting instinct tug me left, then right. Streetlights buzzed above me, their orange glow painting the pavement in sickly shadows. Windows glimmered with fragments of other people's lives, dinners, arguments, laughter. I searched their facades as though one of them might recognize me. I stopped at an abandoned building 3 blocks away. Boarded windows, peeling paint, the door chained. Yet, something about it prickled the air the same way my apartment hallway had that first night. My hand went to the key instinctively. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering, the key's jagged teeth biting into my palm. I didn't move closer. Not yet. Instead, I returned home, and for the first time since this began, the hallway outside my door was perfectly, cruelly empty. No coin, no note, no gift from the shadows. And I realized then, the waiting was worse than the finding.
The abandoned house drew me like a tide. I told myself I wasn't going back, that curiosity wasn't enough to drag me 3 blocks into silence. But by evening, my steps carried me there anyway. It looked worse in daylight. Boards nailed haphazardly across the windows, their wood warped and cracked. Graffiti covered one side of the wall, angry strokes of color fading under years of sun and rain. The door was still chained, a heavy padlock glinting with rust. No sign of life, no reason for anyone to linger. Yet the moment I saw it, the key in my pocket grew heavier, as though it recognized its home. I stood there with my arms folded, trying to look casual, like someone who'd taken a wrong turn on her way somewhere else. A man passed with his dog, glanced at me once, then kept walking. No one else paid me attention, but I felt like the house did. Its shadow loomed across the pavement, sharp even under the fading light. I pulled the key out, running my fingers along its grooves. My heart raced. Could it fit this lock? I didn't try. Not yet. Some part of me was terrified of what waited inside, of what I'd find if I pushed that door open. Instead, I walked a slow circle around the property. The chain-link fence rattled when I brushed it. Through a gap in the boards, I caught glimpses of the inside. Warped floorboards, broken furniture, something that might have been an old coat hanging from a nail. The smell of mildew drifted out, faint but undeniable. It was wrong, all of it, and yet familiar. That night, back in my apartment, I placed the key on my pillow and stared at it until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I dreamed again of doors, only this time I opened one. Inside was nothing but darkness, and from it, a whisper. "You already know." I woke gasping, the sheets tangled around me. The key had fallen to the floor, resting against the leg of the nightstand like a faithful pet. The next morning, there was something waiting again. Not on the doormat, inside. The book I had left on the coffee table was open, though I hadn't touched it. The spine bent, the pages spread wide. At first, I thought the draft from the window had flipped it open, but then I saw where it had stopped. A passage underlined in heavy, dark ink. "You cannot forget what was never gone." I slammed it shut, hands trembling. My apartment door was still bolted, the windows locked. Yet someone had been here. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes scanning every corner as if the intruder might still linger in the shadows. But nothing moved. Only my own ragged breathing filled the room. I gathered all 5 objects: the coin, the note, the book, the photograph, and the key, and shoved them into a box. I didn't want them scattered in plain sight anymore. But even hidden, they throbbed in the room like a second heartbeat. By the time night fell again, I couldn't shake the pull of that house. The thought of it clawed at me, more relentless than fear. I knew the key belonged there, and I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The question was no longer if I would go, it was when.
I lasted 3 more nights before I broke. 3 nights of lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the key on my nightstand like a weight pressing into my dreams. 3 nights of waking to the sense that someone stood outside my door, not knocking, not leaving anything new, just waiting. The silence became unbearable, louder than any sound. On the 4th evening, as the sky folded into darkness, I slipped the key into my pocket and walked back to the abandoned house. My steps were too quick, too purposeful, as though my body had already decided what my mind still resisted. The street was nearly empty. A car passed once, headlights brushing against the broken facade before disappearing around the corner. The chain-link fence rattled in the wind, and I squeezed through the same gap I had found before. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door loomed tall, its wood warped and scarred. The chain still hung heavy, the padlock rusted. My fingers shook as I pulled the key out. It didn't look like it should fit, too old, too jagged. But when I pushed it into the lock, it slid home with a terrifying ease. The sound of metal turning echoed louder than it should have. For a moment I froze, expecting lights to flare on, a hand to grip my shoulder, some alarm to scream through the night. But nothing happened. Only silence. I pulled the chain free and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Damp, mildew, and the ghost of something burnt long ago. The air was cold, colder than the street outside, as if the walls trapped a season that no longer matched the world beyond. I stepped inside. The floor groaned under my weight, boards bending like tired lungs. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight, swirling shapes that dissolved as soon as I tried to follow them. The living room lay in ruin. A broken chair collapsed in the corner, wallpaper curling like paper left too close to flame. On the mantel, though, something stood untouched. Another object. I approached slowly, light trembling in my hand. There, balanced perfectly in the center, was a glass jar. Inside it, a pressed flower. Pale and brittle, its petals still holding the ghost of lavender color. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew it instantly. I'd pressed it myself when I was 14, sliding it into a dictionary to keep forever. But that book had been lost, packed in a box that never made it to the next house. I remembered crying over it, then forcing myself to stop, to forget. And now, here it was, waiting for me. My chest tightened as I reached for the jar. The glass was smooth, cold. I held it against the light, staring at that fragile bloom, my own handwriting curled across the paper behind it. My name, written in the awkward strokes of adolescence. I whispered without meaning to, "This isn't possible." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun, flashlight jerking across the walls, catching nothing but peeling paint and shadow. My breath came fast, shallow. No one was there. The air pressed in closer, heavy with the smell of rot and memory. "Who's there?" I said, my voice too loud in the empty space. No answer. Only the jar in my hand, trembling with the shake of my fingers. I backed toward the door, heart slamming against my ribs, and slipped outside again, fumbling to pull the chain back into place, the padlock clicking shut. The night air struck me sharp, almost sweet after the damp suffocation inside. I didn't run, but I walked too quickly, clutching the jar to my chest all the way home. The key still burned in my pocket. Back in my apartment, I set the jar beside the box of other objects. 6 now. Each one pulling me further down a path I hadn't chosen. And I knew, whatever game this was, I had already stepped too deep to turn back. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't look. I would leave for work like any other day. Eyes forward, keys in hand, ignoring whatever might or might not wait outside my door. But when I opened it, the hallway was empty. Completely, mercifully empty. No coin, no slip of paper, no photograph or jar. For a heartbeat, relief flooded me. Maybe it had stopped. Maybe. At last, I was free. That feeling lasted until lunchtime. I was at my desk, head bent over blueprints, trying to bury myself in numbers and lines instead of memories. The office hummed around me. Printers, chatter, the click of keyboards. It was normal, safe. Then I noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the corner of my desk lay a small envelope. No one had handed it to me. No one had said a word. My colleagues bustled as usual, not even glancing my way. I froze, staring at it. Plain white, folded neatly. My name, written in the same careful hand as the tag on the key. My mouth went dry. I touched it with one fingertip as though it might burn me, then slid it open under the desk. Inside was a single scrap of fabric. Blue cotton, faded. I knew it instantly. It was from the dress I had worn the day my first boyfriend left me. 16, standing on the train platform, trying not to cry as the train pulled away. I had ripped the hem on the metal bench, and the tear had stayed with me for years, even after the dress was gone. And now, a perfect square of that fabric rested in my palm. I shoved the envelope into my bag and snapped it shut, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I looked around the office. Who had placed it there? Everyone seemed busy, no one watching me. And yet, I felt eyes on me, invisible and steady. The rest of the day dragged like a weight. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat. My pulse hammered in my ears with every ring of the phone, every voice that called my name. I left work early, muttering something about not feeling well. Driving home, the city seemed sharper, harsher. Every pedestrian on the sidewalk looked like they might know me. Every car in my rearview mirror lingered too long. When I finally parked, I sat gripping the wheel until my fingers ached, staring at the entrance to my building. Inside my apartment, I placed the scrap of fabric with the others. 7 objects now. The box was nearly full, yet each addition made it feel emptier, like it was stealing space from me instead of filling it. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door. Hours passed. Midnight, 2 a.m., 3, silence. And then, just before dawn, a sound. Not a knock, never a knock. A soft scrape, like fingertips brushing the wood of the door. Slow, deliberate, lingering. I held my breath, frozen in place, every nerve raw. The sound stopped for a few seconds. Then silence returned, heavy and absolute. When I finally dared to move, I unlocked the door with trembling hands and pulled it open. Nothing. No one. But lying against the threshold was something worse than any object I had yet found. A single page torn from a notebook. On it, in that same patient handwriting, was a message I couldn't mistake. You left me behind. I read the words over and over until the letters blurred. You left me behind. They pulsed on the page like a wound. My hands shook so violently I nearly tore it in two. But instead, I folded it with trembling fingers and shoved it into the box with the others. 8 objects now, each heavier than the last. But it wasn't just the objects anymore. It was the presence, the sound outside the door, the way my apartment air felt charged, like static waiting to spark. Someone was out there, someone who knew me, who walked where I walked, breathed the same air, yet never showed their face. And now they were accusing me. That day at work, I barely lasted an hour. Every phone call startled me. Every colleague's glance felt too long, too curious. I left before lunch, unable to stand the hum of normal life pressing against the storm inside me. I drove without direction, the city's streets folding into one another, until I found myself parked near the old bridge, the one I hadn't crossed in years. I sat gripping the wheel, staring at the river below, and thought about the summers of my childhood, about the faces of people I had once loved, once left behind. Could it be someone from then? Someone who never forgave me? The question haunted me as I walked along the riverbank, key still in my pocket, the flower jar wrapped in a scarf inside my bag. I didn't know why I had brought it with me. Maybe because leaving it behind felt like betrayal. Maybe because part of me feared what would happen if I didn't. That evening, as I climbed the stairs back to my apartment, I felt it before I saw it, the weight of eyes. Halfway up, I froze. At the landing above, just beyond the shadow of the flickering bulb, someone stood, a figure, tall, still, blurred by the weak light. I couldn't make out a face. "Hello?" My voice broke on the word. The figure didn't move. I took one step up, my heart hammered so loudly it drowned the sound of my own breath. Another step. And then, nothing. The light flickered and the landing was empty. I clutched the railing, dizziness swaying through me. Had I imagined it? A trick of light? Of exhaustion? Or had someone truly been there, watching, waiting? I forced myself up the stairs, fumbling with my keys, nearly dropping them as I unlocked my door. Inside, I leaned against the wall, chest heaving, listening for any sound in the hall. But there was only silence. On the floor, against my doormat, lay another slip of paper. This one didn't say remember. It didn't say not gone. It said, look closer. The words clawed under my skin. Look closer. At what? The objects? Myself? the shadows that kept vanishing just as I noticed them. I picked up the note with shaking hands, shut the door, and slid to the floor. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't just afraid. I was certain. Someone wanted me to see them. And soon, I would. I barely slept after that. The words, "look closer," circled me like vultures, swooping down every time my mind tried to rest. They followed me from the sink to the mirror, from the chair to the window. Every reflection seemed deeper, every shadow sharper, as if the letters themselves had carved cracks into the world around me. I caught myself staring into corners, into patterns on the wall, into the grain of the wooden floor, as though the message were hidden there, waiting for me to notice. By the second night, I hadn't eaten a proper meal. Coffee had become my only anchor, bitter and endless, trembling in my hands as much as my nerves. I thought of calling the police, but what could I show them? A box of objects tied only to me? A handful of notes with no fingerprints? A key that led to a place I shouldn't have entered? The moment I described it, I knew how it would sound. Paranoid, unhinged, and maybe I was. But the objects were real. Their weight was real, and the silence pressing against my door each night was real, too. At 3 a.m., unable to bear the waiting, I rose from bed and walked into the living room. The box sat on the coffee table, lid closed, but I could feel it pulsing like a second heart. I lifted the lid slowly, as though something alive might leap out. Inside, the coin glimmered dully. The folded note, the photograph with its blurred figure, the fabric scrap, the pressed flower sealed in glass, the key, the book with its underlined passage. 8, 9, 10 things now, tangled with memory until I could barely tell the difference between past and present. My hands hovered over them, unsure whether to touch or to flee. And then I heard it. Not outside, not beyond the door. Inside. A breath. It came from the hallway that led to my bedroom. A slow, steady inhale, exhale. So human, so close. It froze the blood in my veins. My body turned to ice, every hair on my skin rising as though I had been plunged into cold water. I wasn't alone. Who's there? My voice cracked, absurdly small against the weight of the silence that followed. The breath stopped. The quiet that replaced it was worse. I held the box like a shield and crept toward the hall, my phone's flashlight cut across the walls, trembling with my hand. No one. Nothing. But the smell? Faint. Familiar. Smoke. The scent of matches burned out too soon, the same smell that clung to the matchbook left days ago. It wound around me, thin but undeniable, slipping down my throat until I coughed. I turned the corner toward the bedroom, and the window was open. I know I had locked it. I always locked it. The curtains shifted in the night breeze, whispering against one another. The city lights spilled in, fractured by the glass, painting trembling stripes across the sheets. My bed was empty, but the covers bore the impression of weight, as if someone had sat there minutes ago. My throat tightened. I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break bone. Whoever it was, they had been inside again, sitting where I slept, breathing where I breathed. The objects hadn't been left only at my door. They were here, with me. I slammed the window shut, pulled the lock into place, and dragged a chair under the handle. My chest ached with each shallow breath as I backed into the corner, eyes scanning the room again and again. Nothing moved, yet I felt surrounded. The silence had shape now, thick and alive. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the window, waiting for the dawn to burn this nightmare away. By morning, my decision was already carved into me. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't sit in this apartment collecting tokens of my past like offerings from a ghost. If they wanted me to look closer, then I would, but on my terms. I packed the box into a bag, the weight almost unbearable on my shoulder, and gripped the key in my fist until the rust dug crescents into my palm. There was only one place left to go: back to the house. The streets felt different with the box on my shoulder, heavier. Every step I took seemed to echo further than it should have, as if the city itself were listening. I didn't take my car this time. I walked, clutching the strap of the bag with one hand, the key burning in my other palm. I could feel the edges of the objects shifting against each other inside, scraping like bones in a coffin. When I reached the abandoned house, dusk was already settling in. The sky hung low, bruised purple and gold, and the streetlights flickered awake one by one. The chain-link fence rattled as I slipped through the gap, the sound too loud in the silence of the street. The door waited for me like it had been expecting my return. The padlock looked exactly as I had left it, but when I pressed the key into the jagged teeth, it slid home with unnatural ease. The click of the lock opening felt louder than a gunshot. Inside, the air swallowed me whole, damp, heavy, tinged with that same burnt scent that had haunted my apartment. Dust stirred in the beam of my flashlight, curling in slow spirals as if resisting the light. I placed the bag on the floor and pulled out the objects one by one, arranging them carefully on the broken mantel where the jar had once waited. The coin, the note, the photograph, the fabric, the flower, the book, the scrap of paper with its cruel words. Each one sat in its place like an offering to something unseen. The silence pressed tighter as the collection grew. My chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. "Here," I whispered, voice barely steady. "You wanted me here, didn't you?" Nothing answered, but the air shifted. A floorboard creaked in the room beyond, then another, slow, deliberate, the sound of weight distributing itself across the rotten wood. "Show yourself," I demanded, though the words wavered. My flashlight trembled as I turned it toward the noise. The beam cut across the far doorway. Empty, only the peeling wallpaper, the shadows stretching long. But the sound was real, a presence moving just out of reach, circling me. I tightened my grip on the key. Its teeth dug into my palm, grounding me, anchoring me against the swell of panic rising in my chest. My light landed on something new. A chair, half broken, shoved against the wall. On its seat lay another envelope. I approached slowly, every nerve screaming. The paper was yellowed, edges curling, but the handwriting on the front was clear, my name written with the same steady hand as before. I opened it. Inside was a page torn from a diary. The ink had faded, but I could still read it. "You forgot the promise." My throat closed. My hand shook. Promise? What promise? My memories reeled, tumbling back through the years, grasping for something that fit. Childhood whispers, summers by the river, a figure I could never quite see in photographs, a secret kept in the dark because no one wanted to believe it mattered. The house groaned around me, as though my realization had weight. The air grew colder, sinking into my skin. I stepped back toward the door, but the chain swung shut on its own, rattling like laughter. The sound echoed through the rooms, and the floorboards whispered with footsteps I couldn't see. I wasn't alone, and whoever had brought me here was ready for me to remember. The diary page trembled in my hand. "You forgot the promise." The words seemed to echo off the walls, louder than my own heartbeat. I folded it with shaking fingers, but the paper felt hot, as if the ink still burned. The footsteps above me continued, slow, measured, not trying to hide. Whoever it was, they wanted me to hear them. I tilted my flashlight upward toward the ceiling. Dust sifted down in lazy spirals as the wood groaned. My breath came shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I already knew I wouldn't get an answer. Another creak, this one closer to the stairs at the end of the hall. I tightened my grip on the key, then forced my legs to move. Each step toward the staircase felt heavier than the last, as though the air thickened, trying to keep me back. My flashlight beam shook across peeling wallpaper, revealing faded flowers that seemed to wilt as I passed. The stairs loomed before me, steep and narrow, the wood sagging with age. I placed one foot on the first step. It wailed under my weight. Another footstep sounded above, waiting. I climbed, each board groaning like a warning. Halfway up, the smell hit me again. Smoke, faint but sharp, curling into my lungs. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, but the scent clung. Familiar, undeniable. At the top, the hallway stretched long and dim, the floor scattered with plaster and dust. 3 doors, all slightly ajar. My flashlight flicked across each in turn. The first revealed only broken shelves, the second a bathroom sink stained with rust, the mirror cracked down the middle. The third door waited at the very end. Its wood was darker, smoother, as though someone had polished it recently. My skin prickled. I knew, without knowing why, that this was where I had to go. I reached out, the key heavy in my other hand. But before I touched the handle, I saw something carved into the wood. Words, etched deep, almost frantic. I leaned closer, tracing the letters with my light. Selene, don't forget. My stomach dropped. The letters looked old, weathered by time, yet they bore my name. My fingers trembled as I brushed the grooves. I had no memory of carving them, yet something inside me stirred, as if I had. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was colder still, thick with dust and silence. My light caught the outline of a small bed, the quilt still folded as if waiting for someone to return. Against the wall, a desk, and on that desk, a photograph in a cracked frame. I approached slowly, my breath fogged in the air, though the night wasn't that cold. When I lifted the frame, the dust smeared across my hands, but the image underneath made me gasp. It was me again, younger, maybe 10, sitting on that same bed, my face turned towards someone beside me. But the figure had been scratched out, lines of ink gouged across the paper, frantic, angry. Only my own face remained, staring back at me with a strange mix of fear and trust. Behind me, the floor creaked. I spun, flashlight cutting across the room. The doorway was empty, but the sound had been right there. "Stop it," I whispered, voice shaking. "If you want me to remember, then show yourself." The silence swelled. The house seemed to breathe, walls shifting in the dark. And then, from somewhere close, too close, came a whisper. "You promised." The word brushed against my ear as if lips had spoken it right beside me. I staggered back, clutching the key and the frame, heart slamming so hard I thought my chest might break. The room closed in, the shadows stretched longer, darker, until they almost looked like arms reaching toward me. And I knew the final piece of this wasn't hidden in objects anymore. It was here, alive,
waiting for me to face it.
The whisper clung to me long after the sound itself faded. You promised. It hung in the air like smoke, curling through the walls, through my lungs, through the marrow of my bones. My flashlight shook wildly as I swept it across the room. The shadows resisted, thick and alive, stretching like hands that vanished when the beam touched them. I pressed my back against the desk, the photograph frame digging into my ribs. "I don't know what you want," I whispered, my voice too thin to hold itself steady. "I don't remember." But that was a lie. Pieces were breaking loose inside me, jagged shards of memory forcing themselves to the surface. Summer nights at my grandparents' house, running barefoot through the grass. A boy, older than me, but not by much. His name hovered just out of reach, always on the tip of my tongue. He never knocked on the door when he came. He would just appear, standing in the hallway, smiling in the half-light. We'd sneak out together, daring each other into the woods, whispering secrets we swore we'd carry forever. And one night I promised him something, though the memory blurred when I reached for it, slipping away like water through my fingers. The air in the room grew colder, pressing down like a storm. My light flickered once, then steadied on the far corner, and that's when I saw him. Not fully, never fully, but enough. A figure, tall and thin, his outline quivering at the edge of the light. His face was blurred, as if my mind refused to sharpen it, but I felt the weight of his gaze, heavy with years of waiting. "You left me," the whisper came again, though his lips never moved. "You forgot." Tears burned my eyes. I shook my head, clutching the key so tightly that it cut my palm. "I didn't know. I couldn't keep..." But the excuses sounded hollow even to me. The memories tightened their grip, his hand brushing mine, the pressed flower he gave me, the promise spoken under a sky full of fireflies that we'd never leave each other behind. And I had left, moved away, packed boxes, new city, new school. I had buried those summers, buried him. "I couldn't come back," I whispered. "They tore it all down. I thought you were gone." The shadows trembled. The figure stepped closer, and with each movement the objects on the mantel rattled. The coin, the book, the photograph, the flower jar. All the pieces of him, of us, vibrating with the weight of memory. "You promised." The voice thundered now, shaking the walls. "And you forgot." I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, my tears hot against the cold air. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to leave you." For a moment, the silence swallowed me. Then softer, "But you did." The key slipped from my hand, clattering against the floorboards. The figure stopped, the air shifting with his stillness. "I can't change the past," I whispered, raising my head. "But I remember now. I won't forget you again. I see you. I hear you." The figure trembled, edges dissolving like mist in sunlight. The air warmed slightly, enough for me to breathe again. One by one, the objects on the mantel stilled, their vibrations fading into silence. And then, nothing. The room was empty. Only the photograph in my hand remained. The scratched-out figure, now clear, his face, young and solemn, gazing at me the way he had all those years ago. I staggered down the stairs, through the suffocating silence, out into the night air. My lungs burned with relief as the door slammed behind me. The street stretched empty, the sky pale with the promise of dawn. I carried the photograph close to my chest, the weight of all the other objects heavy in the bag. He was gone. Or maybe he had always been gone, And this was his way of making me remember. Either way, I knew one thing. I would never again hear the sound outside my door without thinking of him, the man who never knocked.